Does a farmer in Middlesex County see Ontario completely differently than, say, a cab driver in Ottawa or a mine technician in Sudbury? In a province that's often viewed in regions, does where you sit really define where you stand? A new report from the Mowat Centre quantifies some of what we think. And here to explore our regional differences and similarities, Andrew Parkin. He's co-author of the report and director of the Mowat Centre, which is now associated with the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the U of T. Ashley Challoner is here. She's Vice President of Policy at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And Trish Hennessy, Executive Director of the Upstream Institute, which is a health and well-being focused think tank. And we're delighted to welcome everybody back to TVO for your second appearance on the agenda, all of you. Deuces Wild here tonight. I'm going to spend a bit of time with Andrew because it's his study off the top, just to get some of the background in place. Why did you specifically want to look at how all these regions are either different or similar? What was the idea there?
Well, we did a survey about a year ago on a number of different policy issues on Ontario, federal, provincial issues, trade issues, economic issues, social issues. But we wanted to do it in a way that could tell a richer story about Ontario than is usually the case. In a national survey, when you break out Ontario, usually you have about 400 people. You're really looking at the greater GTA and then a few add-ons. But Ontario, it's geographically big. It's an increasingly complex place to govern. So we wanted to be able to tell a more nuanced story. So we built up the sample to 2,000 Ontarians, which is quite large for a survey of one province. And that, did then allow us to look at different pockets around the province.
We do want to put this chart up because you have broken up the province into different regions. And of course, probably no two Ontarians agree on where these boundaries ought to be drawn.
That's right.
And I'll start with this. I mean, you can see, again, throughout the course of this, when we bring up graphics, I'm going to be a little more descriptive than I otherwise would be because we have lots of people listening on podcast and they can't see these maps. But basically, you've got a map here of the southern part of Ontario, and northern Ontario really comes pretty far south on your map.
It does.
How come?
It reflects a little bit where people live in the province. So we had to get about 8 regions where we've got roughly 250 respondents in the survey in each of those regions. It is a peculiar map. It's not really how people would call their regions. We have, you see, there's one region there that just goes along the 401, kind of as you get out of Toronto through Kitchener, London, down to Windsor.
Is that the green one there?
Yeah,
one in green? Okay.
And that's because we're trying to look at urban-rural differences among other things. So you don't really want to lump Kitchener, London, and Windsor in with the much more rural areas of Southwest Ontario on either side of that. So it was our colleagues at Mission Research who carried out the fieldwork for us that created this instrument to help us, get 8 groups of 250 respondents that gives us enough to work with to pull out the patterns.
And again, for podcast people, you've got the 416, which is Toronto, obviously, Hamilton, Niagara, mostly urban. The GTA, which is Greater Toronto Area, includes the 905. Southwest Ontario, mostly rural. The Ottawa Belt, mostly urban. Eastern Ontario, mostly rural. Northern Ontario, mostly rural. And that 401 corridor, which you described, mostly urban. In terms of, so you told us 2,000 people surveyed, which gives you a much richer flavor of what people think as opposed to the 400 or so. Mm-hmm. But again, would it be the same kind of dynamic, half of them in the Greater Toronto Area, half of them everywhere else?
No, there's 250 in 416, 250 in 905, and 250 in each, roughly 250 in each of those 8 areas that you see.
Okay, so 250 plus 250 is 500 in the GTA.
Yes.
But it's still only a quarter of the province.
That's right.
So you are going to get some of those nuances that you might otherwise not get.
That's right, yeah.
That's the idea here. Okay, let's get into this here. We are going to pluck out of this report several of the different things that you've been surveying. But let me get the overarching comments from you two first before we go any further. You have read the study. What jumped out at you?
We actually released our own Ontario Economic Report recently, just in February. And what really struck me about Andrew's study is how it kind of mirrored and spoke to, in many ways, the survey that we did of our members of businesses. In particular, we've looked at how Ontario has recovered from the recession, looking at employment growth with respect to Ontario's regions. And we found that, the Toronto and GTA area really outpaced everyone else. And you can see across the province, much lower employment growth over the past 15 years, and in the north actually a decline. And when you look at some of the data from Mowat's study, you find that there's a kind of sense of greater positivity in the economy in Toronto than there are in other regions. And that makes complete sense to us when we look at our data and see where employment growth has been. And so it's not surprising that Toronto is far more optimistic than other regions of Ontario.
Trish, what did you find?
Well, you go looking for differences and sometimes you find commonalities. And I thought that there were a lot of commonalities in terms of how people across this very different, diverse, expansive province look at different issues. The one finding that jumped out at me was job security, that the plurality doesn't matter where you live, if your economy is getting left behind, if you're in economic distress, or if your economy is doing really well. The plurality of respondents said, we're worried about job security.
Okay, let's put those numbers up right now since you've come to it. Sheldon, here's the first of several graphs that we're going to share with our audience here. And the question they asked is, how concerned are you about full-time employment? And you're quite right. These numbers are, put it this way. Ashley is right. In the GTA and the 401 corridor and the sort of closer to those areas you get, there is a lot more concern. 65% in the GTA and 905 are concerned. In the 401 corridor, which goes all the way down to southwestern Ontario, 63% are concerned. Hamilton, Niagara, 63% again. In Eastern Ontario, 61%. The provincial average is 61%. How concerned are you about full-time employment in Toronto 416? 58%. Still more than half. This is interesting, though, Andrew. How concerned are you about full-time employment? In Northern Ontario, only 57%, the lowest number of those surveyed. That is opposite to what I suspect most people would think. How come?
Well, I think it's also opposite from what Ashley was saying, in the sense that they're also the most likely to say they're worried about the condition of their local economy, but they're feeling a little better about the jobs. I think it could have to do just with the nature of the labor market in more places. There's more churn. I think in a metropolitan, the major metropolitan area, there's probably more people moving in and out of temporary jobs than there might be in other parts of the province. But I just kind of want to get back to what both Trish and Ashley said, because I think they both captured the two sides of the coin that we're looking at. On a number of the questions where we might think that there would be big differences, there aren't, right? There's a lot of commonality of experience that comes out of this. And that's actually different from what Ontarians themselves think, because one of the questions in the survey was, do you think that people who live in urban and rural areas have the same values? And most Ontarians don't think that. They disagree. They think there must be differences. And yet we see on a number of questions there aren't. But there's one big exception to that, and that is those questions that are about how is your local community doing? How is your local economy doing? So Ashley pointed out one example. Another example is on trade, international trade. If you ask Ontarians about, do you like free trade? Should we have more trade agreements with other countries? They're a uniform agreement and positive feeling about that. If you ask Ontarians, how have the trade agreements we have now affected your local community? You get the pattern that Ashley pointed out, that those are the questions where there is an urban-rural difference. There's a north-south difference, but there's a general pattern where the bigger a city you live in, the more you think that free trade is working for you. The smaller a community you live in, the more you're not sure.
Ashley, I know you're not a demographer, but I do want to ask you this question anyway, because we are experiencing unemployment rates right now that haven't been this low in 4 decades. And yet you are still seeing in some pockets of this province, 2/3 of the people saying they are very concerned about their prospects for employment. How does that make sense?
Well, that was one of the more fascinating things we saw in the data. How do you square that circle? In theory, people should be very confident when they look at the unemployment rate. They should see it as a seller's market for their labor, but that's not happening. Our assessment of this is related to the changing labor market. We're hearing a lot about disruption. We're hearing a lot about automation and AI. So people may be concerned about not necessarily their job right now, but what does the future of their job look like? Maybe they're thinking, I know what my skill set is, but is that skill set still going to be of value in the future? And that could create a lot of uncertainty.
Anything you want to add in terms of that disconnect?
I actually think the respondents here have diagnosed the problem. The Ontario economy is undergoing a major shift. And so there's a lot of worry and uncertainty out there. And findings in this survey can be replicated and seen in other surveys, national and provincial, that show a declining number of people identify themselves as middle class that reveal a sense of anxiety about the future, especially when you start talking about your kids and your grandkids' future. So I think concern about the economy is the river that runs through it all.
Let's bring up the second of the several graphs that we're going to bring up during the course of our conversation here. Sheldon, if you'd go to the next one, this is the one where the Mowat Centre asks, what kind of impact do you think governments have on people's lives? And they ask this question, presumably to get some kind of sense about whether people think positively about the impact governments can have, or whether they think the impact is more negative. And again, where the old expression, where you stand depends on where you sit. I'll go through this in some detail, again, for people listening on podcasts. The percentage of people who think that the government can have a positive impact on people's lives, Toronto 416, 41%. In the Ottawa Belt, 37%. GTA 905, 30%. The average across Ontario is 30%. Only 3 in 10 people think the government has, and we're talking municipal, provincial, and federal, only 3 in 10 think governments have a positive impact on their lives. And as you go further down, only a quarter of the people in eastern and southwestern Ontario, 23% in the north, 22% Hamilton, Niagara, and that 401 corridor, 22%. Conversely, the percentage of people who say governments have a negative impact on people's lives in southwestern Ontario, which despite the low unemployment rates generally, still facing tough economic times, 6 out of 10 people. 6 out of 10 in the north, almost 6 out of 10 in the 401 corridor. Again, almost 6 out of 10 in Hamilton, Niagara. 56% in the east, 49% is the average. Ottawa Belt, 47%. GTA 905, 47%. And there you get to the capital city, Toronto 416, and only 33% of the people think governments have a negative impact on their lives. Pays to live in the capital city, I guess, eh? Part of it?
I think that's part of it. I think, I'm going to say this about this, because this is the one where you look at and you see that, there is a difference. There's a range of differences. You say where you sit can affect your view. But it's not a predictable pattern, right? It's not urban-rural difference. It's not north-south difference. The area of the province that's least likely to say that governments have a positive impact on most people's lives is Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, London, Windsor. Those are prosperous cities in many ways.
Well, Kitchener, Waterloo, isn't it?
Yeah,
Windsor,
so
less so.
less so, exactly. But they're urban. Sorry, so this is the one where it's definitely is. It's Toronto that stands out the most, a little bit Ottawa. So does it play to live close to government? You see government is visible. But also in a big city like Toronto, you can rely on things like public transit and a number of other things, maybe to a certain degree more than others. So sure. Pays to live in capital city.
What did you conclude from seeing those numbers?
I thought it was very telling that those 3 areas that benefited the most after the recession recovery were also above average in their perspective on government. They were more likely to view it as positive. And this tells us really about a different divide, and that's the regions of Ontario that came out ahead or at least recovered after the recession, and those regions of Ontario that didn't or are still struggling.
Let me put this question to you, Trish, this way. I think you represent an organization that believes in the power of government to do good things for people. And these numbers show that by a 19% gap, which is, fairly sizable, people have a fairly negative view about what governments can or cannot do in their lives. You find that distressing?
Yeah, this is actually one of the more depressing results out of the whole survey for me. But it's one of those questions that raise even more questions for me. So which level of government are they damning? Do they feel more favorable toward their local government, but feel that senior governments, especially if you're in a community where your economy has been left behind, and you might say the senior levels of government don't care about my community, especially if you're in rural community or you're in the north where those economies have been restructured long time ago, where you're in communities where your kids are going to go to university and probably are not going to come back because the opportunity isn't there. So I think I agree with you in that. I think this is reflecting the economic reality and the concern about economic fortunes and futures.
Would it, I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job here, but Trish has raised the issue of whether or not people see a distinction between maybe they like their local government, but they're not nutty bananas about their senior levels of governments, or vice versa. Who knows? Should the question have been broken up differently?
We deliberately phrased it this way so it wouldn't bleed into particular feelings about who happens to be running a particular government at a different time. And we also ask it at different points over time, so we want that consistency. Could you have follow-up questions on those issues? Absolutely. We don't have them right here, but it's a totally interesting, thing that people could get into.
Well, let me try this with Ashley. If you are somebody who works in government and you are watching this right now, you're an elected official somewhere, municipally, provincially, federally, and you see this believability gap, you're 19 points underwater on average across the province. What should you infer from that?
Well, speaking provincially, I think that they could infer that there's a certain feeling of neglect amongst regions in Ontario. There are many regions that are unable to perform to the level of their potential because of a lack of investment from government, infrastructure being top of that list. I think we talk a lot about transit and transportation infrastructure, and that's critical, but infrastructure also includes things like high-speed internet, which is really key to unlocking business with respect to reaching global markets or markets elsewhere, but also giving people the opportunity to educate themselves, to engage in training, and to engage with the world outside of their region. So, when government isn't putting that money towards these things that benefit not only business but Ontarians generally, then of course they're going to feel like not only are they being left behind by the economy, but they're being left behind by the government as well.
Trish, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would add to it. And there are answers in this survey. So the people in this survey correctly diagnose the problem, and I think that they're responding to governments who may only be reacting to some of the symptoms and not getting to the source of the problem. And there was plenty of evidence in this survey that that Ontarians, no matter where you live, actually want governments to invest in upstream thinking. Their top priorities include invest more in healthcare. Education was up there too. And then they see their governments actually bringing in austerity agendas on these fronts. So the two don't jive, and you're getting judged for that.
Thus the name of your organization. You want problems fixed upstream before the problems happen, lest you have to fix them downstream when it costs 10 times as much.
Exactly.
That's the idea.
And it means it requires an entirely different approach to policymaking than what we've been doing at every jurisdictional level across Canada.
You are all Canadians. You are all Ontarians. How many Torontonians do we have here? Torontonian?
Yeah.
Montreal.
Montreal.
Rural Saskatchewan, but I've lived in Thunder Bay, Hamilton, Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto.
Oh, you're plenty Ontarian.
I've been
for us
everywhere,
then.
man.
Okay. Because Mowat Centre asked a question about how attached people feel to the various ways we have of describing ourselves. And should we bring those numbers up here? How attached do we feel to Canada? And apparently 73% of us in the province of Ontario feel very attached to Canada. Let's keep going. Very or somewhat attached to Canada? 93%. That's a pretty good number. I want to meet the 7% of people who don't feel attached to Canada as Ontarians. How about very or somewhat attached to the province of Ontario? 85%. And let's reveal one more. Very or somewhat attached to the city or the town or the region in which we live? 83%. Fascinating. Andrew, what'd you infer from that?
I think what I inferred is where you go next, or where I went with that, because I had assumed that, people feel good about the country, they feel good about the province, they feel good about the community that they live in. I had assumed, though, that again, the smaller a town you live in, the more attached you are to it. Maybe you know your neighbors, maybe your family has been there for several generations, whereas Toronto is a newcomer city. But if you go beyond that and then you look again by region, where do people feel most strongly to their local community? It's actually in the 416. And maybe retrospectively that kind of made sense when I thought about it a bit more, but nonetheless I had a thought that attachment to your community was a small town thing. And the survey told me that I was wrong. that it's a big city thing.
People who live in this city overwhelmingly seem to like this city.
Yeah, and they feel attached to it. They feel a sort of sense
All of its problems notwithstanding.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Trish, the number that the conventional wisdom is Ontarians don't see themselves as Ontarians. They see themselves as Canadians first, Ontarians second. These numbers seem to confirm that. 93% of people feel very or somewhat attached to Canada. 83% of people feel very or somewhat 85% very or somewhat attached to the province. Any idea why we still see ourselves as Canadians first, Ontarians second? Quebecers don't, Albertans don't, British Columbians don't.
Yeah, I think there's a deep history there. And so I'm just going to, I'm having this flashback to 1990 and putting all of my humble belongings into a small Pontiac Acadian and driving from Moose Jaw to Thunder Bay, where I was going to work for the Chronicle Journal. And immediately I understood that no matter where you are in Ontario, you see yourselves as leaders in Canada. You see the national project as well as your local or provincial project. And it was very different coming from Saskatchewan, where, of course, Ottawa was kind of like a swear word,
You do get to boast about being the parents of Medicare, though.
Yeah, we do.
Saskatchewan.
We absolutely do.
You do get to do that. Ashley, how about you?
We got it right first.
You did. How about you?
Well, what I found most interesting is the level of attachment to city and town and region. And this is something that didn't really surprise me. We have, within our network, we have about 135 chambers of commerce and boards of trade across Ontario. And these are community institutions that are led often by volunteers, business leaders in the community who are very serious about their community and its prosperity. So that makes complete sense to me that we have that strong attachment to our local communities. But it did make me think about what the wider implications of that attachment is. For example, what does this say about labor mobility in Ontario? If people are very attached to their local communities, does that mean that they are more likely to turn down economic or employment opportunities elsewhere? What does that mean for Ontarians or regions of Ontario that are trying to attract people? And what does that mean for the skills mismatch? Employers are trying to find the right person for the right job. What if the right people aren't in their local community?
Those are good questions.
Yeah, it's perhaps concerning, but generally positive.
One of the things that we're told unites the country and unites the province outside Toronto is hatred for Toronto. That Toronto is a bit of an outlier in so many ways. And when you did this survey, Andrew, did you find evidence that Toronto is the outlier that therefore leads to a great deal of antipathy outside of the city?
It is. I mean, I can't comment on whether that's the cause of antipathy, but certainly that's a pattern. So we've been through a couple of things. On some of those economic questions, there is an urban-rural difference. On some of the values questions about preferences, there's very little difference across the province. But another one of the patterns that comes out is on a number of the questions we asked, it's not an urban-rural difference. It's not a gradual change as you go from Toronto to the GTA to Hamilton and so on. It's most Ontarians think roughly alike, and then there's Toronto. And I don't want to exaggerate, it's not night and day, but Toronto does have a series of preferences on political and policy questions that is a little bit different from everyone else on questions like immigration, what we've seen with the role of government, even on things like issues around reconciliation and relations with Indigenous people. It's not, you can have questions where the north of Ontario and Hamilton look very similar, and the east of Ontario and that 401 corridor look very similar, and those are dissimilar regions. And to see that they're not divided on these issues was interesting. So yes, Toronto stands out. I just can't comment on whether that's why people have a problem with it, or whether it's the traffic or the Blue Jays or whatever. You may be better placed to comment on that than I. Yeah.
Now, given that have you lived in Toronto? And a whole
For 20 years now.
20 years in Toronto and a whole bunch of other places around the province as well. So you might have a very interesting perspective on why there's so much dislike of Toronto elsewhere. What do you come up with?
You know what? I actually, it comes in passive-aggressive form. They'll never let us live down the fact that Toronto once called in the army because it snowed a lot. So I actually I've never come across that kind of overt aggression in different parts. And from my work, I have to go. I've been to almost every major center in Ontario. So, I've heard it all. I don't know. I don't think it's as as deeply rooted as it's trumped up to be, honestly. But I do think that some communities feel like Toronto gets more attention in terms of Toronto has to work economically, right? And Toronto just needs more resources. And so I think that if you're sitting in a corner of Ontario where the province has sort of let your community die, or it's on life support, and nobody's really coming in to help you, and you see a big discussion about how much money Toronto needs to save its overcrowded subway system, that might rub you the wrong way.
You're not too interested in that argument. Right. Any ideas about why Toronto's the outlier in some of these numbers?
Well, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce represents all regions of Ontario equally, Steve. I will say, though, that...
but half your members are from here, probably, right?
Well, Toronto, most of our members are distributed throughout the province, fairly well. But Toronto does take up a lot of air in the room because of our outsized population, our outsized economic contribution, and because it has very unique needs. Trish is exactly right. Toronto has some real investment problems. But when you live outside of Toronto and your highway has only, one lane in each direction and is full of potholes, and you have to go to the local McDonald's to get Wi-Fi to do your kids' homework, you're not so sympathetic to complaints about full buses and subways in Toronto. And that's entirely legitimate. Again, this goes back to government's need to invest and to reflect the unique needs of each of Ontario's regions rather than try to take kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to regional economic development.
Andrew, I know you're not a partisan political guy, but I want to ask you a quasi-political question anyway here.
Uh-oh.
The last two premiers of Ontario, one Tory, one Liberal, have both represented ridings in Toronto. And they don't want to necessarily be seen to be Toronto politicians, right? They want to represent the entire province of Ontario. Does that hamstring them in doing so?
It doesn't have to. Does it hamstring them to be from a Toronto riding? No, I don't. I think that plays out on the individual basis, how good a communicator they are, who they built relationships with, who they built bridges with. Because and we would never ask this in a survey, but if you ask them to name the riding that people represent, of course, it's not clear that most Ontarians would actually know that. So it really, it comes down to how politicians handle themselves and how they present themselves. But I think what you're getting to, though, and what we've all been talking about is part of the fundamental challenge of governing the province. The population and the economic engine of the province is concentrated in the Greater Toronto area, and that has to be, any governments of any political stripe, no matter what constituency the premier represents, a number one priority. And yet, the huge geography and expanse of the province and communities that are in completely different economic circumstances, industries that may not have as bright a future as the finance industry in Toronto and so on. And you have to respond to that too, despite the numbers. You have to build a hospital system that can respond to the population and the research and scientific activity going on in Toronto, and yet you have to provide health care to thousands of communities across. Any government has to balance that. Whether the constituency you're from, any sophisticated politician should be able to go beyond that.
I will never forget politicians in Northern Ontario telling me that there are ridings in this province that are the size of France and Germany.
Yeah,
Yes.
Absolutely.
I don't know how single people represent ridings that big, but we have them. And anyway, that's the challenge. Let's spend some time on this next one. Sheldon, next graphic, please. Top of page 5. This is obviously one of the key questions facing the province and the country today. Have governments gone far enough in promoting reconciliation with Indigenous people? And let me just go 2/3 of the way down the chart to start with and just give you the sense of what people across the province of Ontario think of that. Have governments gone far enough in promoting reconciliation with Indigenous people? And the 23% suggest that they have gone too far. 44%, not far enough. 26%, neither or about right. And then you've got 8% who don't know. That's fascinating. And of course, it breaks down into with the different regions. In the north, 32%, that's the highest number, think that efforts have gone too far. And in Toronto 416, that's at the opposite end of the scale, 15% saying things have gone too far, a very small number. That's fascinating, considering that so much of what we read, see, and hear in media suggests that we haven't gone nearly far enough, and yet a quarter of the people out there, province-wide, think we've gone way too far. What do you infer from that?
On one hand, I think there's more work to do. On the other hand, there's always going to be a range of opinion, and there are going to be some people who feel that they have their own concerns that they would like to see addressed, and may see this in a little bit of a zero sum. You know, if we're paying attention to someone else's issue, why aren't we paying attention to mine? It's a natural, sentiment that some people might have, and I wouldn't want to read too much into it. But in terms of the point I made about there's more work to do, we had a separate report on some of these questions, and there is a relationship between how people answer these questions and how familiar they feel they are with the history of the issue, particularly the issue of residential schools. So the more that Ontarians say they feel that they know a bit about the history of residential schools, the more supportive they are of moving further on reconciliation. So, maybe despite the efforts that you've outlined, it's not time to stop talking about this, and we're looking forward to more agenda programs on the issue. And I'm serious about that.
We will be there.
It just shows that the conversation is only beginning.
Okay, this is a tricky question to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway, so here goes. I think it is true to say that most Indigenous people in this province live in big urban areas. I think it is probably also true to say that people who live in Northern Ontario would have more individual face-to-face contact with Indigenous people than people who actually live in the capital city. In which case, what do we infer from the fact that people in the North are at the top of the list among those who say, we've already done enough for reconciliation, thank you very much?
I would phrase it differently. It can't be a coincidence. I think I would want to point out that the differences between the North, while you're right, it's furthest on the end, the North and, say, Hamilton, Niagara, for instance, actually are not...
They're 3 points apart.
Which is not important.
Statistically insignificant, I think you folks
exactly.
say.
So it doesn't take away the point that you've just made, but this is a case where I think it's important not to exaggerate, the extent of the differences. And then, to go further, I would say that we're back to that question about how secure people are feeling about their local economy and so on. I mean, attitudes about, let's say, sharing as a general rule, are affected by how much you feel you have to share. And so some of these questions compound each other, even though we've left the economic questions, 10 minutes ago in the conversation. There's a chance that they seep back
for sure
into these other issues.
Okay, we are literally down to our last minute here, so let me give you 30 seconds and you 30 seconds to comment on that reconciliation chart. Sure. Trish.
The people on the 44% say, or more, say we need to do more. They're on the right side of history. I think a lot more public education has to be done here. On every indicator, Indigenous peoples are not benefiting from economic growth in the same way that non-Indigenous peoples are. So we have a lot of work to do there. I predict boldly in 3 to 5 years from now that those numbers will change on the uptick. The conversation really has just begun.
Ashley.
These numbers are very disappointing. We strongly believe that the economic empowerment and advancement of Indigenous peoples benefits all Ontarians. There's tremendous opportunity to bring them more fully into the economy and into the labor market. There's tremendous untapped skills amongst Indigenous communities in Ontario. And we have a number of members who have been leaders, progressive leaders on this issue. Bruce Power is a good example of one of them. And so, we want to see more companies and frankly, the government as well take on reconciliation and economic empowerment of Indigenous peoples as a critical economic issue and not the way it's been treated in the past.
That's Ashley Challoner, Vice President of Policy, Ontario Chamber of Commerce. We thank you for being here. Trish Hennessy from the Upstream Institute. Think tank looks at ways to ensure a healthier population and community well-being. And thanks to Andrew Parkin as well. It's his study at the Mowat Centre, which I presume is on your website if anybody wants to have a look at it. There we go. Good of all of you to come into TVO tonight. Thanks so much for this.
A pleasure.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.